All right, everybody, this video is Waves in June of 2024, firmware 2.01 of the Z8 that I am tweaking my settings to take advantage of all the firmware updates and just lessons learned out in the field, particularly for action autofocus. And I have a whole video that I released today concurrently with this video on why I'm doing that. You can click right here to see it. If you haven't watched it already. I also think that my original setup videos for this camera are kind of prerequisites. Things will make more sense if you've watched those. There's a video for each bank that I set up. One for the basic knock-around standard. Bank A has all of the menu structure and how I've tweaked it in my camera. Bank B is action, Bank C is landscape, Bank D is astro. Those are shorter videos, just how I would tweak those basic settings. This is going to be more on that sort of secondary scale. It's going to just show you some tweaks to those original settings. And for the first time, I'm going to allow you to download my settings. We'll talk about that at the end. So let's just jump in, have a look here at how things have changed, particularly in the I menu and the control layout for this camera, how the buttons affect things. So I use the I menu constantly. I jump in here and I change what bank I'm in through the I menu. I change what subject detection mode I'm in with the touch screen or with the D-pad if I'm looking through the viewfinder in the I menu. I'm constantly using it for things that I frequently change. And so it's important to set it up with the things that you need to access frequently. And I've tweaked that a bit from my original settings. So we'll go through that. I'm going to jump into the menu. And we're going to work on Bank B first, okay? So we're in custom settings Bank B, shooting Bank B. These are the action settings. We'll look at A, C, and D at the very end of this video. So we're in B, and we're going to go into custom settings, and we're going to go into F, section F, controls, and we're going to look at customizing the I menu. And you can change any of these settings by you can touch it with the touch screen, and you can scroll down and choose different settings, but I'm just going to talk through what I've got in here. It's really similar to what I had before. A lot hasn't changed. Choose image area, FX, DX, metering mode, vibration reduction, long exposure noise reduction, the shooting bank selection, the custom settings bank selection you just saw me using. I put monitor viewfinder brightness settings in here. It's really nice. You can access either or and change those really quickly given the brightness of your shooting situation. Silent mode, I think that's really important in action shooting. Sometimes you want to be dead quiet and not disturb animals. Sometimes you want to turn it on when you hand it to someone else so that they know that you're actually firing 20 frames a second. I still have interval timer shooting and focus shift shooting in here. Not so necessary in action mode, but I haven't had a need to change it. And then the AF area mode subject detection, that's really important. I don't often move off of AFC with the autofocus manual focus mode, but the subject detection mode is what I really access through this menu option. All right, so now let's look at controls and how those have changed. And again, you can reference that video that I did today, I linked earlier to see why I'm doing what I'm doing. Function 1 button is a switch between FX and DX. It's really nice. You don't have to roll a wheel or anything. You just touch that button and it flips from FX to DX. There's times where you just know your subject's too small for the lens that you're shooting with, and you can see it bigger through the viewfinder by cropping in on the sensor and enlarging that in the viewfinder. And also you know you're going to crop in post, so why bring all that data to just crop away? If you can see your subject and how its pose looks and what the critical moment's happening a little bit better zoomed in, why not do it, particularly when you have 46 megapixels and you're cropping to 20 megapixels, which I frequently remind people is the same as we had in the days of the D500. Function 2, that's a recall shooting functions hold button, and this is a major change from my original action Bank B settings. The way that I'm setting up recall shooting functions hold is incorporating Dennis Valverde, my amazing guide in Costa Rica that I work with running workshops. You go in here, you press this, and we're going to choose from the list recall shooting functions hold. That means when I press the button, it's going to change certain parameter settings that I decide on, and it's going to lock those changes until I press the button again and go back to the way it was before. And I don't want to change anything except autofocus area mode, which is going to be 3D. If I go over to the right, I can choose which one I want. Go to the left, I go back. Pressing the OK button selects and deselects what's being programmed in for recall shooting functions. I don't want white balance, so I deselect it. And auto subject detection, autofocus subject detection options, I have those turned off. And if you watch that video, you'll see why. This is for those false positives where the subject detection is actually throwing you for a loop. So now when you push function 2, you get smart 3D tracking. You can set what your autofocus target is, and having a face or eyes or something that the camera thinks is a face or eyes, like a stray leaf, will not throw it off. It's getting rid of that annoyance that sometimes happens, okay? So going back in here, no change for the exposure compensation dial. I have changed the autofocus button on the side of the camera. You can see it highlighted there, what button we're talking about. I've changed that from, it only has 2 choices, from autofocus mode, autofocus area mode, which I prefer to control through the eye menu, to cycle AF area mode. And for my action shooting, I only have a couple that I would use. I have wide area large and wide area small. These are going to be my base settings. Those are the only 2 I really want standard. You know, it's going to flip if I hit that recall shooting functions hold button and then flip back to one of these 2 when I hit it again. I can cycle which one it is with that autofocus button, all right? My function 3 button still hasn't changed. That accesses the top item in the My menu, just a quick window into all the things that you've programmed into My menu. Autofocus on is still autofocus on in the basic mode, which in standard would be either wide area large or wide area small, but could flip to 3D with no subject detection with that function 3 button, or the function 2 button, recall shooting functions hold. I programmed the center of the little joystick that moves the focus point around to where if you press it, it resets the focus point to the center of the frame. The display button's a massive change. The display button now is AF on plus auto area autofocus. This is that birds in flight mode. You're in bird eye detect autofocus. When you hit the display button, instead of it switching what display mode you're looking at through the viewfinder or on the back LCD, it now automatically activates autofocus area mode, which is just brilliant for many scenarios with birds in flight. You can watch the video I did today to explain when and why that's so great. The OK button, I have zoom in to 100%. If you click that, you say zoom on and off, and I want it to be 1:1, 100%. The play button still play. I've got some, I'm not even going to go into what the accessory grip is. I never use that. The movie record button gives me a depth of field preview. I can see whether both sets of eyes of 2 creatures are in focus at a given aperture that's beyond f5.6 by pressing that button. Camera does not automatically stop down beyond f5.6 to protect its autofocus capabilities. Haven't changed the exposure compensation button, haven't changed the ISO button, haven't changed the command dials, but now bracket, which is something I would never use in the action settings, is suddenly display. Now when I hit the bracket button, it's going to cycle through displays as if I was hitting the display button. I chose a button on the Z8 that I would never use in action autofocus scenarios with moving subjects. I'm not going to bracket. So that's a good place to put display, to be able to change to a clean view or a simplified view or see all of your exposure data. And then I don't think I've changed much else. I'm still using both of the lens function buttons in case I'm using a lens with only one, for the hybrid handoff where it goes to 3D tracking with subject detection, so that if I lock a subject in my wide area large or small, I hit that lens function button, it hands it off to a 3D tracking point that follows it all over the frame. And that's it. That's the only major changes, all right? I'm going to quickly run through a few changes that I've done in the other banks. I had to cut and change battery there really quick. So let's jump in and have a look at custom settings bank A. We don't really have any changes in the shooting banks whatsoever to note on this. And if we have a look at the eye menu, it hasn't really changed. You know, as I flip it from B to A, not any changes at all, really. We still have the same exact settings for action as we have for the standard banks. Where the changes are more about what's going on here in controls. So we'll jump in, look at the custom controls for shooting. Function 1 is now bracketing burst. If I hit that front top button, it's bracketing burst. That means if I hold that button down when I push the shutter and I have bracketing active, it fires all the frames in the bracket. You could have 3 frames, 5 frames, 7 frames, 3 stops apart, 2 stops apart, whatever you've chosen. If I'm holding down function 1 while I push the shutter, it fires all the frames with one press of the shutter. That's super handy. I shoot bracketed frames a lot in my standard mode and my landscape mode. Function 2 is that same recall shooting functions hold that I showed you in the original setup, where it just flips everything to be ready for action. 1250th of a second, widest aperture possible, auto ISO, autofocus area 3D, subject tracking automatic, release mode 20 frames per second. This is the only way to program release modes at a button press with this camera, sadly. Something I wish Nikon would look at. No change to any of these functions. The focus mode button, again, is cycle AF area mode, but in my standard mode, I want a different set of things that I could choose from. It's no longer going to be wide area, small, and large. It's single point autofocus, wide area, small, 3D tracking, or auto area autofocus. By pressing that button, I can flip between those area modes. Those are what makes sense for me. It might not be the same for you. Those are the focus modes I love in my knockaround mode. I don't need any of the others. So just pressing that focus area mode button will change those for me. All right, function 3 accesses the top of the My menu. That's not a change. AF on is still AF on. The reset, I reset by pressing the center of the joystick, same display. There's not really any other changes. I don't have the display on auto area for my knockaround mode, really only just for my dedicated action mode. There's no other real changes to note, all right? So that being said, let's jump into Custom Settings Bank C and have a look at how those things changed. And you'll notice that I have exposure delay now in here. That's because this is a tripod mode. I basically think of landscape shooting. I'm setting up on the tripod. I'm really honing my scene. It could be still life too, but I call it landscape because that's what I do more of. Not a whole lot of changes, except that all of a sudden I have exposure delay mode in here instead of silent shooting mode. And I have it set automatically to be at 0.5 seconds, a half a second. So it's going to wait a half a second after I push the button to take the frame, just to avoid camera shake. Otherwise, no major changes. Oh, this should be AFS. I don't know why it's an AFC. I'll resave my settings after that. It should be AFS, and it should be in pinpoint autofocus. Funny, I must have missed that. So I am in landscape mode. It should be AFS, pinpoint autofocus for the most accurate possible autofocus with low light autofocus in it, and noise reduction on. Vibration reduction, I don't ever turn it off for the tripod. You can if you want. I've never had any deleterious effects. All right, so now, if we take a look at what's going on with my controls, not a whole lot of change. I don't think you're going to see. Still have the bracketing. Function 2 is now, instead of recall shooting functions hold, it's a clear display. What this is called is live view information off. When I press the function 2 button, I have nothing on the screen to distract me from my composition in the landscape. It just clears all of the data off the screen, period. And again, I've changed the cycle AF area mode settings in here. What do I want? I want pinpoint or single point, just a larger, and sometimes I don't even want 3D tracking. I don't know why that's on there. Pinpoint or single point. Those are the only two autofocus area modes that I want anything to do with when I'm shooting the landscape or still life. I want to nail my focus. Sometimes I want a little larger focus point, but usually I want pinpoint. That's my default. Everything else, I think, remains essentially the same. Yep, no other changes. So that's all the changes for Bank C. All right, we'll jump in, change to Bank D, and we have a look here. Some things have changed. This is Milky Way. This is shooting at night, star photography, dark work photography. And you'll notice not a lot has changed. I've still got exposure delay mode. I have my monitor and viewfinder brightness, super important. You're going to want to turn those down. And I have the warm display colors. I can change that so that we're only seeing everything in the camera, warm display, or all of the shooting displays, but the menus and the playback are not. So those are your mode 1, mode 2. And you can change, how bright is that setting. I like -2, but I leave it to red off initially. I can turn it on right here from the I menu. That's really, really handy. Okay, any control changes, not a whole lot different. It's still, let's see, actually it is. I've got the recall focus position. So if I get a star locked into focus, I've changed my controls so that my lens function buttons lock focus. They set a focus point. I can memorize infinity focus. Once I've gotten a planet or a bright star locked in focus with pinpoint autofocus and I know I have infinity nailed, or some important scene in the night, I can hold down my lens function button for a couple seconds. I'll get a little mark in the middle of my screen that says focus position saved, and then I can recall it at any time with function 1. Function 2 is still clear all of the junk off my display so that all I see is a clean composition of my scene. And then I don't think the only other thing that I've changed potentially is cycle AF area mode. Still pinpoint and single point are the only things active. All right, that one I got right. And I don't think there's any other major changes. Nope. So that is the essential ways that I have tweaked my settings since I originally did my bank setup videos. That's where I'm at today. The most important stuff obviously is for action autofocus tracking. There's a few little nuanced tweaks like for landscape and for Astro in particular that are nice, and utilizing some of the capabilities that we have in firmware. So again, you know, I don't expect that you guys are going to adopt every setting that works for me, for you, as if it's written in stone and that's the way you ought to do it. This is just what works for me, and hopefully it's illustrative of how one person like me uses the camera. Maybe you can learn some of the ways that the camera works best just from watching it, but maybe they don't work best for your particular style of photography or your preferences. So you're gonna take some and leave some, choose and tweak. If you come up with settings that you like better than what I've got, you know, certainly have at, let me know. But, you know, as I said, I'm going to allow folks to download these settings, this bin file, and there'll be instructions on how to just basically put my camera settings into your camera and lock them in. I've stripped out my copyright information so it won't be tagging your files with my name, but otherwise it's the same exact settings as I would have in my own camera. And you can download those. You can hit this link right here. It'll take you over to my website to a download page for those. You can also go into this video's full description. And alongside that, you'll find links to this camera and all the other cameras that I use and recommend, and the gear that I use and recommend. Those links help me out alongside the stuff we sell in our store, which is the stuff that I absolutely can't do without and stand behind 100%. So those things help me out. If you appreciate what we do, I appreciate your using those links. Again, I just thank everybody for watching. I hope you're enjoying your camera. Hit me up with any comments that you have, either via email or here on the channel. You know, your input really drives the content on this channel. So thanks, everybody.